This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is December 11th, 2025.
I'm Scott Luneboom.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, we talk about the BC Conservative leadership race that's shaping up already, challenges with DRIPA, and federal drama as floor crossings happen as we go to hit record, which is fantastic for content. Patreon.com/Politicos to keep up with all the drama by chipping us a few bucks. It's the holidays. I'm fundraising for my job, so I can fundraise for this too. You make this podcast happen. Get on our Patreon and get an invite to our Slack to be part of the community.
Yeah, and just a quick scheduling note for the holidays. We're going to be off for the 2 weeks of Christmas and New Year's. We record Thursday night, and we're not taking a break away from our families to do a podcast about politics when nothing's happening politically that week. But next week we've got a great interview already recorded with Rob Michelber about the John Horgan memoir, John Horgan in His Own Words, which we'll be posting next week. Yeah,
so we've already been recording for an hour, so if this isn't our A game, blame next week's excellent interview. I hope it works out well. Let's just dive into this. Here in BC, it's been, a week since John Rustad announced he's resigning after he said he wasn't resigning after his party told him to resign or that he was fired. And unsurprisingly, names who were floated are now forming websites and getting asked and starting to say yes or no, or maybe not. And let's just dive into it. This is in no particular order, I guess. Aaron Gunn, federal Conservative MP, is a maybe.
Yeah, so he's been saying he's been considering it. He's been involved with the BC Conservatives basically ever since they started coming up as a real opposition party and not just, a random dozen guys in the northern part of the province keeping the brand alive. He's, rookie MP and do we even need to say who Aaron Gunn is, or is he well known enough at this point?
I think he's well known enough.
I think self-explanatory.
Most relevant thing that's funniest is he got the red light from BC. Well, it was the BC Liberals then for running for the last leadership they held before they became BC United, and then ceased doing what political parties do while not closing up shop as a political party.
So yeah, he's reportedly considering it. He's definitely seems to be one of these figures that has as strong an interest in provincial politics as federal, despite having a federal seat. So I could definitely see it, and I think if he does make the jump, it's going to be a case where he is a presumptive frontrunner, if not the presumptive frontrunner. Complicating it is the federal Conservative caucus is shrinking, which we'll be getting to in a moment, and that is probably going to keep a decent amount of pressure on him from his federal colleagues not to make the jump.
You can't leave the one shrinking Conservative caucus to go lead the other shrinking Conservative caucus.
I suspect the change in leadership has arrested the shrinking in the BC Conservative caucus. Main point is his riding was one that was a tough fight. He won it by a decent margin, but throughout the election, it looked like it was going to be a real close call. on whether or not he'd win the North Island riding. So I could see that in addition to not wanting to have another person lead the federal caucus, there would be concerns about about the by-election if that were to happen there.
Yeah, notably, he defeated Tenniel Johnston from the NDP by 5,000 votes. She is now running for the leadership of that federal party. A long shot candidate, probably, but it would be, I would assume she'd try for it again, given she posted a pretty strong result, and the NDP has held that seat in the past. It was a classic vote splitting seat where it goes 39%, 33%, 26% in the last election. Next up is Caroline Elliott, is mulling a bid and apparently also has a
there's a draft Caroline Elliott.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah,
social media accounts have popped up in the last few days, which I don't think anybody really believes are a true third-party draft attempt, but more of a soft launch trying to generate some buzz on that one.
Yeah, she's never been elected to office, but she's kind of been, posting and writing about politics for a while. She did a PhD from SFU, and I think during that started building her profile. And now she's a political commentator writing for The Hub and posting regularly. I found she did have a role with a nonprofit defending property rights, I think, as well.
Yeah, and I think she's also one of the co-founders or a contributor to the newly launched Without Diminishment publication too.
She's also Kevin Falcon's sister-in-law.
Yeah, and was one of the BC United candidates before that thing imploded.
Yeah, she's gone more on the saying land acknowledgements shouldn't happen because the law has changed position. I feel like she's radicalized in the last year or two, or at least gotten
increasingly critical of the province's approach to reconciliation, and would be one of the major critics on the next news item we'll talk about after this.
Speaking of people on the more radical, and Carrie Lynn Finley is also thinking of running, has a website up, or at least kind of placeholder out there. She was the former Conservative MP for South Surrey White Rock from 2019 to 2025, as well as in Delta Richmond East from 2011 to 2015.
Cabinet minister too, was she not?
Yeah, Minister of National Defense and Minister of National Revenue under Harper. Also married, I believe, to Bruce Chapman, a current Conservative MLA.
Associate Minister of National Defense, but yeah. More recently, that is probably the more BC politics relevant aspect, is the Bruce Chapman connection.
That would be interesting to have a couple in the same caucus.
On the other hand, she's not an elected MLA, so it would probably be pretty easy to find a friendly MLA that could potentially step down for her to run. It's not going to have to look far on that one.
The next weird potential option is, out of nowhere, somehow Christy Clark returned.
So was it 2 days ago? She popped up on Twitter and did a retrospective post about how great it was when she launched her campaign 15 years ago, etc., which everybody looked at as wait, is this Christy Clark flown a trial balloon? I can't imagine she's actually going to step in and run, but it's made for some fun discourse.
She did also go and speak to Wolfgang Deppner at the Canadian Press and argued that the Conservatives should not be, quote, kooky if they want to govern. and argued for a more like moderate approach for the province or for the provincial party, which I say is denying BC's history of electing people like Bill Vander Zalm, and you can't get much kookier than him. And he was premier. He won an election. Didn't win two, but he won one. So you can be kooky and win. I don't know if you should be, but...
The province has also changed in the last 40-odd years.
Thankfully.
I don't think the kooky goes quite as far as it once did. Definitely not enough to win as many seats as you need.
And then the final, like, will they, won't they, we have this week is on Eleanor Sturko, who is currently an independent. She told the Goldstream News Gazette she hadn't ruled out a return or bid for party leadership, but then told BC Today that she wants to stay focused on the needs of her constituents, so she's not interested in running for leader at this moment. Which isn't a definitive no, it's a probably not.
It's a probably not. And there's also, a few other people out there that are rumored to be considering it, but none have really broken out this past week into serious discussion or even really soft launches of potential leadership races. But we'll have to keep an eye out for them later on. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, looking at this roster that we've talked about, there isn't really anyone other than a very long shot, probably not actually a real thing, Christy Clark return. There's no one really as a standard bearer for kind of the more moderate, the business and economic focused wing of the right half of the political spectrum in there. So it's going to be interesting to see if anyone does step up in that lane or how crowded that does get.
I have to think there's a couple. The names are slipping my mind right now, but like they have some longer standing former BC Liberals who are probably eyeing a chance.
Do another shot at a leadership race, and there's a couple others. But it doesn't seem to be where the energy is, but I really do expect that someone is going to try and represent that wing of the party.
I think the other thing to watch for will be if they move for a really quick leadership race. And I've seen one or two rumors that I don't even have links to put in here that maybe they could go to try to get a leader in place before the legislature returns in the spring, which is not that long from now.
Yeah, that's a real tight one. There's been a tendency in the last several rounds of leadership races to do these really long, drawn-out ones that I don't think actually serve the parties all that well, but at the same time, you don't want to do like a truncated 2 to 3 month one. Ideally, they're probably looking at like a 6-month thing if they go that way, but I don't know. We'll see.
And if it goes quick, that means if you don't have your campaign up by Christmas, it gets real hard to make everything work. And in particular, a lot of campaigns will want to be up ASAP so they can get a donation before December 31st and get one on January 1st.
Yeah, just the donation limits reset in a couple weeks' time. So you can get those banked. You're in a better spot than those that don't start a fundraise until the new year.
Let's talk about one of the things that's going to be a challenge for the government in the new year. Another recent court decision, this time from the BC Court of Appeal, has decided that the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act is law. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. They decided it's justiciable, which means that they are allowed to interpret it and rule that other acts are not consistent. And I think the common understanding of this was the government's commitment with DRIPA was to bring laws into compliance with the UN Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People. And so, I don't know, naively, one would think the courts could rule whether that is happening or not, which is what they did here. And the government has argued, no, we said at the time it was a goal, an ambition, but not a requirement that we do it. And they got one of 3 justices on the Court of Appeal to agree, which was not enough.
Yeah, this is a real case of be careful what you actually pass into legislation, and if you really, really want it to be non-judiciable, you probably should write that in to the law, that this doesn't create a cause of action or anything like that. Does the NDP will swear up and down that they never intended this? Even there's been people digging back through the debates back then when they introduced this, and then the Indigenous Affairs Minister Scott Fraser was making those same points, but they did write the law in a way that left that open enough to interpretation that there's probably some sloppy drafting here. And beyond that, even if the original act didn't have it in there, they also in 2021 passed the amendments to the Interpretation Act saying everything should be on the BC rule. The BC statute book should be interpreted in that way. So at the very least, they were sending legislative mixed messages on this one.
The case itself was brought forward by the Gitxaala and Ihatasat First Nations, who argued the government's online mineral claims staking system excluded First Nations and therefore violated the Crown's duty to consult under UNDRIP or DRIPA. And, that's what got upheld essentially by the Court of Appeal here, is the government needs a better system that does integrate First Nations. And I think one thing that's interesting here, I haven't actually read this full case, but I believe this mineral claim staking system has come out or was developed post-DRIPA. And so there's an element to it where I think even if the government says, well, not every law, is consistent with DRIPA and it'll take us time to get there, but the new stuff they're doing under the, rules they wrote for themselves should be, one would hope, consistent. And I think what we're seeing as well, because what came out after this pretty quickly was calls from the Conservatives to scrap all of DRIPA and David Eby promising to amend the law itself in the way you describe. I think what we're seeing is a walk back by Eby in the way we've seen largely, that he's not as firm or doesn't see as politically valuable holding to, the approach that the legislature unanimously took on DRIPA as they did at the time. And I don't know, it's notable for injury
on this one. He was also the Attorney General when these bills were passed and, well, more specifically, drafted and introduced. So beyond the broader policy direction questions on this, there's also the thing of that it was his office that wrote these laws in this way, or had a pretty direct hand in crafting them. And there's more than just the standard policy direction questions on how well things were executed on this and what the broader angle should be on these.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a legislating, I don't know if it's a legislative quality issue or a we meant it when we said it, but we don't mean it now issue. But either way, it's egg on the face of the government.
Well, I think they've been fairly well, at least their public-facing communications has all been pretty consistent on this in terms of, what they'll say to when opposition parties were asking them in the legislature back when this was being passed of what their defenses are now on it, that it was never intended to be judiciable, and it was always intended to be a thing that guides how the government does things, not a thing that the courts are supposed to weigh into. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't screw up the drafting of this, but I don't think there's been inconsistency from them, at least in terms of what they said, even if maybe what they intended was different.
I will love to see how they follow DRPA's requirement that they consult with Indigenous nations before introducing the bill to, make the DRPA Act non-justiciable. Because I'm betting many won't like that. Some might be nonplussed, but at least two nations will be unhappy.
Yeah, it'll be controversial when it comes around, if it does. Despite David Eby saying that, they don't seem to be in a huge rush to actually take legislative action on it. The Conservatives have been calling for the House to be returned to address this and pass new legislation. So far, the NDP have resisted the calls on that one.
I mean, I think they're being rich. It's not an emergency. The courts aren't very fast, and if they bring in something in March, it's fine. I don't know. I find the Conservatives to have gone to 11 here when probably a 7 would have been sufficient.
They do have a reasonable point, though, on the uncertainty aspect of it and what that's going to do to economic investment in the province, and that is a real issue that probably should not be left to fester for all that long. And yeah, it's Christmas time. I don't think anyone's really expecting that they're going to be writing legislation on December 24th or something. But ideally, it's not something that you should let hang out there for more than a couple weeks at most. There should be seen to be at least forward motion on that, with resolution coming pretty quickly on that, if you want to maintain the economic certainty and business confidence in the province.
I don't know. I feel like some businesses will use any excuse to blame the province for their own decisions. There was the story this past week of the casino or hotel development in Richmond that they're saying they're not going ahead because the Cowichan decision, and it's like bullshit.
I think more concerning than that one, which there's any number of reasons you can choose to make investment or not, is in court filings, one of the property owners in the Cowichan decision area, the private property ones, so ones that title was not directly changed by the decision, but nevertheless the logic of the decision and the general finding that Aboriginal title encumbers or applies to all fees or private fee simple lands as well. That company in recent court filings asking to basically be added to the ongoing appeal as an interested party or a party to it, said that one of their lender has declined financing, citing that, and that they've as well lost a tenant on one of their properties in the area as a result. So there is starting to be signs that that there is actual impacts beyond just the government-held fee simple lands that were directly decided on in that decision.
Sure. We'll see what the government does when it returns. I don't have the date because it'll be a new session. They'll prorogue over the holidays and return
historically
a new...
it's been February-ish.
Yeah. The calendar's not on the legislature website. People know when it is, and they can, figure it out and hash it out in the Slack, and we'll return to it then. But I'm sure we'll have some nice conservative drama in the leadership race to get back to when we get to in January. For now, we have federal conservative drama, as this afternoon, Ontario MP Michael Ma, who I didn't know, there's 338 MPs. I don't profess to know most of them. He's no longer a Conservative MP. He's now a Liberal, and he joined he's so Liberal, he stood on stage at the Liberal Christmas party with Mark Carney. And, now they are one seat from a majority, and Elizabeth May deciding to vote one more time for the budget, keeps this government afloat.
Yeah, well, I think it's even more unknown than that, because there's, as of this last election, 343 seats in there. Yes. They added a few more. But yeah, was someone I'd not really heard of. His writing, I think, is notable for being the one where the Liberals had to drop their candidate Paul Cheyne for suggesting that another Conservative candidate from a different riding, Joe Tay, should be turned into the Chinese government for a bounty that was being placed on him. But other than that, have not had much of a profile.
Yeah. I did look at his Wikipedia. He was born in Hong Kong. He moved to Canada at age 12. He grew up in Vancouver, actually, and did schooling out here. But yeah, is now in the Greater Toronto area. So being a Liberal out there just kind of makes sense, even if you were first elected as a Conservative. We'll see. We know that Matt Genero from Edmonton is not planning to stick around long. That makes a lot of tie votes in the House of Commons, I believe. And one more, Conservative out or one more Liberal in, and they have a functional majority as much as David Eby does. I do find it funny. Everyone's finding all of these rumors like, oh, I know 2 more Conservatives and an NDP MP who will cross the floor. And I'm like, there's 7. I can name all 7 NDP MPs. And it's really tough to see any of them going.
Yeah, also, if it's a rumor in Ottawa that everybody knows, the chances of it being true are almost nil.
Mm-hmm.
Ottawa rumors never... The conventional wisdom Ottawa rumors almost never pan out in reality.
The other political party drama kind of the week was the NDP finally did the thing and told Eve Engler, no, you can't be a leadership candidate in our race. The official word went to him a couple weeks ago, actually, November 27th. It's an interesting figuring out if someone gets denied, right? Because the party never says it publicly. They respect people who apply enough that it's a private matter between the two of them. So we first get Eve's side of the story.
It's a private matter between the two of them. Like, you want, as a party, to be trustworthy enough that if someone discloses everything that is in their past, including stuff that is, potentially damaging to their reputation or stuff they might not want public or whatnot, that's not going to get broadcast to the wider world. So it's a very good thing for parties to not necessarily be super public and air all the dirty laundry out front. That said, when there's a controversy, the stuff's going to come out, and this is a high-profile one where there's going to be a bunch of fight. It's not, someone applied to run as a candidate in one specific riding, and the background check turned up something that was disqualifying, but for everybody left on terms that kept it out of the public.
No, this one started ugly and ends ugly. That's also the interesting thing on this is Eve Engler was known to be a controversial figure, to say the least, at the start of this. And it was going to be a tough vetting process no matter what on it. Which makes it interesting that his chosen approach was to go hard on the NDP and just come out swinging from day one,
before anything had been filed or decided or even Eve Angler was basically running against the party from day one and going out of his way to antagonize and alienate the people who would be deciding whether he was eligible to be a candidate or not.
Politically, one might say it's a bad strategy.
Yeah, that doesn't work well usually.
The official reasons given, they are 4 separate categories. Number 1, credible evidence of harassment, intimidation, and physical confrontation. The party says they've received many letters from members of the party and the public indicating his candidacy is incompatibility with the principles and core values of the party, including disruptively confronting elected officials, interrupting meetings to such an extent that people felt unsafe and disinclined to return, intimidating party members and staff, following people to their private accommodations or private vehicles, and insisting they respond to your questions. And, quote, the high volume, nature, and consistency of the complaints raises reasonable concerns, and you have documented your involvement in similar behavior on your X profile. Angler's response to this is largely, he was a journalist who was hard-hitting and tried to really push politicians to get answers, and that's not a position where you have to make people... You do sometimes need to challenge people in power, and sometimes that does mean, following them with a microphone.
There's a line, though. At some point it crosses the line. And it's worth remembering that the NDP, under their previous leader, had several incidents of people coming up and harassing and getting in confrontations with Jagmeet Singh. So this is something that the NDP in particular is probably going to have more front of mind than other parties will, and have very reasonable concerns with that sort of behavior directed towards their elected members.
Number 2, promotion of authoritarian and anti-democratic narratives, engaging in Rwandan genocide denial. Examples here, and there are links. We'll put the link to the show note to Angler's post that has the link to his full document dump. And there's links in there to some of his stuff. Some of it, even notice 1 or 2 of his tweets has actually been deleted that they link to, which is interesting. They say he has echoed Russian state propaganda with respect to the Russo-Ukrainian war and NATO, comments suggesting sympathy for Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. And the one I find most interesting on here is repeatedly calling to abolish Canada's list of terrorist organizations, which would remove a key national condemnation of groups that have violated international human rights law. And we could go through the others, but I think we're probably mostly on the same side on those. But I didn't realize the NDP was invested in the terror list.
Well, they made a pretty big deal when they're lobbying to put the Proud Boys on it bore fruit. So it's something that the party has stood behind as an important tool of governance.
Or at very least, they supported the idea that if we're going to have this, it shouldn't all just be Muslim groups on there. But I feel like that's the one on there that undermines the others. The other ones stand on their own.
Yeah, that's the thing about this. Is you could pretty much pick almost anything at random here, and it would be disqualifying on its own accord. The fact that there's just a lot on it, and actually even just giving a little benefit of a doubt, maybe you could let one thing slide here, even though you probably shouldn't, with the Rwandan genocide denial or basically being a mouthpiece for Putin. But you bundle them all together, and that's no way that is going to fly at all here. And I get the fact that the NDP is not going to want to spend the next election spending all of their time answering questions about, pick a random terrorist group here, and do you think that they shouldn't be on this list, even though they've committed, atrocity X, Y, or Z on there. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think that alone it like throws the rest of this into question here, because the rest of those are all very strong points on their own. Even that one's pretty strong itself.
I think the NDP could, like, there are civil society groups that call for the abolition of the terrorist organizations who would still be broadly viewed as on the left, center left. But let's continue. The next section is comments consistent with anti-Semitic attitudes. And this is the one where some of it is weird. Like, they criticize him for repeating and amplifying the term Holocaust industry. And then they link to a blog where he references Norman Finkelstein's book, The Holocaust Industry. And it's like, if he's talking about the book written by a Jewish critic, like a person who is Jewish, I'm a little less sympathetic for the criticism of Engler there. But then on a separate one, when he talks about Zionist Jews stealing incessantly, that's bad.
They're all bad. Like there's none of these are good, and I could definitely also see why there would be a lot of Jewish Canadians that would find the term the Holocaust industry, and particularly having that repeated and amplified, to be offensive. But yeah, the rest, it gets progressively worse from that one.
And then finally, the unclear commitment to the NDP. The weirdest one in here is, quote, expressing an intention to run for the Green Party of Canada, which they link to a Blue Sky post by @eveengler.bsky.social, which he says, I can't wait to run for the Greens next. I'm just getting started here. Except it's not clear that is the real Eve Engler. Like, it's very likely a parody account. And that's been his defense, that he doesn't run that one. And I would hope they verified it.
Well, also the bio in that account is
Canada's Chomsky.
Which, if you look at his Twitter one, it's a little more serious than that, and actually a basic bio.
Yeah, and also the profile picture on this Blue Sky account is a very bad headshot, versus the @EveForNDP leader account has fewer followers, but does actually link to his leadership website. So at least that one might also be might be a fan account, or it might be his. But like, linking to what's probably not his account as evidence for why to disqualify him is not helping the NDP's case. So I think that should probably be dropped. But everything else in here, they also argue that, him promoting baseless conspiracy theories about the fairness of the NDP's leadership race, including unfounded allegations of bias, and making antagonistic comments about the NDP well beyond healthy debate, is reasons to disqualify him. And honestly, yeah. Like, even if you don't think they're baseless conspiracies, like, just being antagonistic about the party you're trying to lead, come on, man.
That's the thing. It's like, from how Eve Engler talks about the NDP, you gotta wonder why he even wants to be a member of the party, let alone lead it. Like, he seems to hate the NDP with a passion, so like, why even run for it?
To be fair, most NDP members hate the NDP. It's not an uncommon thing, but he does have a unique hatred of it. The other thing we don't need to talk about.
The NDP members I know would like gripe about the party over beer or tweet about how it's not living up to itself. They don't go like full fire and brimstone preacher about how evil the NDP is.
Yeah. The other thing that's notable here is Eve's lawyer is Dimitri Lascaris, and longtime political watchers will remember when he ran for the Green Party of Canada leadership. And I believe got disqualified.
Sorry, say that again?
I believe he got disqualified from that leadership.
Maybe. Him and Engler really cut from the same cloth. like the anti-NATO talking points that border on Russian propaganda to outright Russian propaganda talking points, common feature of both. The general favorable attitude towards authoritarians in countries that are seen as unaligned with the West. Common bit there. The just the general vibe of the real harsh communication style. All tracks.
Sorry, my correction. Lascaris was the runner-up in the 2020 Green leadership race with 42% of the final ballot votes to enemy Paul.
Yeah. But yeah, somehow it does not surprise me they've found common cause on this one.
We'll see where he goes next. In theory, he claims to have raised $100,000. He says he's willing to return any donations that people feel misled about. It's still weird to raise that much money and not officially send your paperwork in until the last minute. I get the I read his argument that they were going to reject him anyway, so he should have just gotten it over with.
I also don't think he ever registered with the Elections Canada as a leadership contestant.
Yeah, because he never will be a leadership contestant now. Why waste that time doing that paperwork?
Well, just if you're raising money for a leadership campaign, you really should be registered with them. And there's an argument that the Elections Act's a little vague on the timing and the whether or not someone needs to have been officially approved by a party before the parts of the Election Act take effect. But come on, if you're doing this in good faith, you probably should, if for no other reason than out of an abundance of caution to ensure you are complying with the election financing rules, register with them as you start collecting your donations rather than waiting until the last minute after you've raised an alleged six-figure amount of money.
This leaves a race with 5 candidates, and we'll see as the deadlines come up who's able to raise enough to keep staying in the race. It is very funny that Engler probably speaks better French than all of those 5 candidates, but it's not the only criteria to be leader of a Canadian political party, I guess.
No. In fact, it's having to respond to non-stop comment or questions during an election campaign about a history of anti-Semitism, Russian propaganda, genocide denial, etc. in both official languages. Not a great spot to be in. You're not better off doing that bilingually than you are monolingually. Just not where you want to be or where any party wants to find themselves. So, yeah. And I think on this, I think everyone kind of got what they wanted. I don't think Engler ever seriously intended to run for leader or be the leader of the party. Based on his hostile, him against the NDP positioning throughout the whole thing, I'm pretty sure he wanted to be disqualified so he could go on and turn this into a career of I was cancelled by the NDP. Aren't they terrible? Support my Patreon or podcast or whatever. So I think he's going to get what he wants out of this one. And hey, the NDP get what they want in that they're going to have a serious-ish leader that isn't going to be a massive electoral liability for them.
Yes, and we're starting to get towards some policy discussions from some of the leaders. We won't delve into that on this podcast because they're still developing. But I think we are seeing some interesting things, like Avi Lewis has started developing some policy. Rob Ashton has some out there. Heather McPherson has some stuff. I'm excited to see what Avi comes forward this weekend. He's going to be speaking about or launching something on climate and militarism, which I think can have the policy debates that even Engler was arguably pushing for without treating it as fuck the party. It's my way. Like, you could just talk the policy and not, go that way. So probably last time we'll talk about him on the podcast.
I
for a
hope
while,
so.
But yeah. Ottawa's otherwise busy. Just to round out the episode, a new bill has dropped from the federal Liberals, Bill C-16, criminal code amendment, another criminal code amendment, because Bill C-9 is still working its way through committees, and we won't get into that tonight. But C-16, this one is going to toughen gender-based violence laws. A number of different sections to this to make femicide illegal. So murder motivated by hate becomes a first-degree charge. Coercive control becomes criminalized. This is something I've seen a lot of groups call for, and some others a little skeptical of. Some other modernizations in there. A lot of stuff as well around child sexual exploitation material, including cracking down on online sextortion, and notably kind of reintroducing some of the mandatory minimums that have been recently struck down with a proviso that, like, fine, if the judge thinks it's going to be grossly disproportionate, they don't have to do it. So it's a caveat. It's a mostly mandatory minimum approach, which is their way of making it constitutional.
Yeah, we're going to have to see how that holds up and carries on. So the history of the mandatory minimum with this particular offense was that in the 2000s, the Parliament noticed that a lot of conditional sentences were being handed out for possession of child pornography, and wanted to clamp down on that, quite understandably, because that's a unreasonably light sentence for such a heinous crime. And so they put in a floor on what the sentences could be, get strengthened a little later, and notably, it's only up to a year. That's hardly a particularly onerous or cruel and unusual level of punishment for the crime. So it is going to be interesting to see if the truly exceptional circumstances that estate clause on the mandatory minimums will hold to be truly exceptional, or if there's going to be some scope creep as more judges put more and more cases into that category. And this, I think, goes to kind of the push-pull between the legislative and the judicial branch on these sorts of issues, where there is sometimes a lack of trust on Parliament's part on whether or not the judges are going to be handing out reasonable sentences for these sorts of crimes.
Overall, I guess I'll keep an eye on how groups respond to this bill. The debate over the coercive control criminalization is a really interesting one to me, because I'm somewhat sympathetic to it by a default, but I've also seen some feminist groups, not all, criticize it as well-intentioned, but practically, when it has been criminalized, it gets weaponized against women. The idea of criminalizing coercive control is to say, if a abusive partner is seizing bank accounts and, using subtler ways to basically control their partner into sticking around or behavior and doing things that don't necessarily rise to physical violence, but are still abusive, to try to target that. And it's definitely a real issue. it's not clear, and it's kind of my issue with all of this, is like it's not clear criminalization solves underlying issues. That was one thing that frustrated me, I think, in the BC government's responses. They're like, the government's tackling the root issues. I'm like, none of this. This is, if the police are involved, we've missed the root issues and we're in the after issues.
The thing is, you do actually have to respond to the crimes as they're happening, though. Like, you can't just go, oh, we need to talk about the root issues and address the root issues, and then not have anything that actually responds to people committing these crimes as they happen.
But because then it also comes down to,
like, we're basically
police resources, right? Like, because understanding coercive control, like having it criminalized is one thing. It's kind of like they passed the conversion therapy ban, and I celebrated that when it was passed, but like no one's been charged with conversion therapy in Canada, and it's very unlikely anyone ever will be, because police don't understand what it is and are reluctant to actually do the hard work that it would take to bring a conviction on some of these fuzzier things where people can argue, make good arguments that that's not what happened there. And that's not to say we should do nothing, obviously, but
even just by criminalizing it, you are going to push some of that behavior or discourage some of that. You're not going to completely eliminate it, but with most of the crime stuff, elimination's never going to be a feasible outcome on this. The only thing you can do is just work hard to beat it back to as low a level as possible with all of this. And like, for all the talk of root causes, we're never going to get to a utopia where there is no crime, no matter how much resources get put into addressing root causes or social work or any of that stuff. There's always going to be an element of that in any society, and you're just going to have to do the hard, unending work of fighting it as it crops up. So yeah, on that front, good that we've got these things, or at least they're getting added to the criminal code. It's good we're moving to undo that ridiculous decision on the mandatory minimums from earlier this fall. So yeah, overall good. We'll see where this goes from here, and I'm going to be curious to see if that escape clause works the way it is intended, or if there's going to be in 10 years another parliament going to be coming in to narrow the scope on that one, or change how that gets done.
Also importantly, whether the Liberals can find a dance partner to get this bill through, because one of the challenges they had with the hate crime bill C9 is everybody hated it for a different reason until the Bloc found an opportunity to get their specific way through. The advantage for this bill is it does mean likely more judicial or more legislative scrutiny than a majority government would necessarily grant it. But it could also get caught in partisan bickering where it doesn't actually get proper scrutiny. It just gets everyone trying to seek an edge to hold the legislation hostage for whatever they want.
I think they'll probably find a dance partner on the Conservatives, or at least one that will, if not loudly champion it, at least see that this doesn't get prevented from passing. Because on that mandatory minimums decision from October, Conservatives were outraged over it, and quite reasonably, and they are going to want to see a legislative response to that. So just on that grounds, I expect to see this one get, if not a loud endorsement, at least a quiet, we're going to get this thing passed from the Conservatives.
Finally, speaking of legislative scrutiny, we'll just quickly mention my favorite stories for the past week have been the trickle of, the budget also contains this stories. One of them is the budget cuts or no longer requires Canada Post to allow blind people to send mail for free, which I didn't know was a thing. But naturally, that pissed a lot of people off because it sounds like one of the most cruel, callous things a government can arbitrarily do. Like, why do you hate blind people, Mark Carney? How much money are you saving? Probably none. Canada Post has said they have no plan to eliminate the program, even if they're not required to do it by law. But funny that got buried in the budget, along with possibly the less funny element where Mark Carney has like supercharged the what was the federal bill, C5, I want to say, that lets the government designate major projects and push them through. They've done that, but with like ministers allowing them to exempt any company or person from any law except the criminal code for 6 years.
Which is wild. Like, that's
Yeah.
yeah. It's one thing to have like we're going to do a different regulatory process or declare something's in the national interest and make sure it gets shepherded along quickly and it doesn't get stalled up in a bunch of endless bureaucratic analysis. It's another thing to just say whatever the minister wants is legal now. Like that's not how a parliamentary democracy is supposed to work. You want to change the law, go through Parliament and get it changed on that, or there's a bunch of laws that will grant the minister discretion in specific cases, but like you need to write those specific cases in. You can't just do this blanket one and have it be any way acceptable in a democracy.
Per the Toronto Star, the new measures, if approved, would allow a cabinet minister to exempt the testing of any product or service from almost any law in order to encourage innovation, competitiveness, and economic growth. The minister would decide if an exemption is in the public interest based on their own unspecified definition, as well as whether the benefits outweigh the risk, and whether sufficient resources exist to maintain oversight of testing, and so forth. It would be up to the taxpayers to pay for monitoring of any fallout. So that is an interesting caveat. Good work by Althea Raj and the Toronto Star for finding that. Apparently the Bloc did notice this, but no other opposition is super keen on the cabinet minister superpower element. So maybe that gets amended out, or because the budget implementation acts are not law yet. Anyway, omnibus bills are back.
Did they ever really leave?
And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicoast. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicoast is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.